For arrays, I think what's gonna likely happen is it'll be very much like for loops, and that like I'll give you the basics of things that you may or may not have seen, most of which you probably would have been, or most of which you probably would have already. But when you start doing the problems, the applications of it are a lot more trickier than maybe what the slides make it sound like they are. So in terms of new material, honestly, might not be too much, but once you start applying it, you'll get a hang of that of kind of what we're going after here in terms of understanding how to use arrays. So really, the first couple sections are just like, hey, how do I know what an array is? What are some basic kind of usages of arrays? And then what we go through is we go through a list of basic methods of arrays. Some of these methods are not new or things that we've used before, like dot length, for example. Others are new and you may not have seen before. But me explaining to you versus you using it, I think the latter will probably be a much better teaching mechanism for kind of really reinforcing what we're trying, what that particular function is trying to do. So an array feels like a little bit taking us a step back, because we've done a lot of problems with arrays already over the past few days. An array is a data structure in JavaScript. Normally, we denote it by the brackets, right? An opening and a closing bracket means that it is an array. An array can hold really an unlimited number of items or elements. An array assumes that we separate each element with a comma. And arrays can hold any other data type. It can hold it can hold functions, it can hold numbers, it can hold strings, etc., etc. Arrays can also hold variables, which are references to other potential values. It can hold nulls, anything else that you want. And this is something we talked about earlier this morning, but typically, just to kind of use proper nomenclature, the things inside of arrays we call elements. So you can say, I want to get this thing in an array, but usually we say elements. Or if you want to be more precise, you also say, this is an array of strings, and I want to get like the third string. But elements is by far the most kind of general way to talk about things inside of an array. Gave it away. Type of is a reserved word in JavaScript, and what that means is you also cannot have something called var type of in JavaScript. What type of is, type of tells us what type of or what data type a particular variable is. Type of typically works best for primitives or things that cannot be changed. So what do I mean when I say things that cannot be changed? Well, we've talked a lot about how strings can't be changed. Numbers can also not be changed, right? Number 4 is always going to be the number 4. You can add 1 to it and create a new number, but you can't change what 4 is, right? Same with things like booleans, nulls, undefined, etc. Those are just kind of, they are what they are when you create and use them. You always create new versions of them, but you can't ever change it. And for those, when you use type of is really good at telling you if this is a string, this is a boolean, this is a number, etc., etc. However, type of works less well, or rather, it becomes a little bit more ambiguous when we talk about things that are changeable, like objects or arrays. So, if I was to create an array here, and I was trying to I wanted to console log out what type of this or what type of the name's array is, what I'm actually going to get is object, because despite how we talk about arrays being a data type and how we talk about it being used very differently, at the end of the day, under the hood in JavaScript, arrays are implemented as objects. They're just kind of a special object with special properties. But all of this is to say that if I was to use type of to try to figure out if something is an array, I'm going to get an object, and that may or may not be what I'm looking for, right? Like, is that in a lot of cases, really, that might not tell me, that might not give me sufficient information to figure out if something is an array. So one of the things here that we'll start seeing is kind of using these built-in methods that JavaScript has that is really used to make our lives easier. If you notice, if we want to figure out something is an array, we call array dot is array. Now, this dot is array, I think we all are pretty familiar with as a function, right? But if you notice the first thing, the array with the capital A, what did I say a variable with a capital first letter usually denoted? A class, right? And so what we're saying here is array is a very specific implementation in JavaScript, and it's something that comes in built into JavaScript, right? An array class is something that's predefined in JavaScript, and when you use an array, you're kind of making a lot of concessions, and also not necessarily concessions, but you're also making an agreement that hey, I'm gonna use an array and it has these different properties. So what this method is actually doing is actually something that's built into JavaScript for all arrays. And so this is just probably a better way for us to figure out if something is indeed an array. So on line 1 there, I've created my array again. And now I do something like this. I go to the array class. I call a class method. Worry not as much about what class method is. Just know that it's a method that we're calling, and we're passing in this variable, this names. And when I do that and I console log it out, that will give me one of two possible values. It will give me a true or a false. Something is either an array in the way that we think about an array, or it's not. And so in one of the problems say that you work on, you come across this problem that's going to ask you, hey, is this an array or not? Well, this is probably the best way for you to kind of really figure that out. It's a little bit more. It's a little bit more precise and more accurate than using type of, even though type of works really well for a lot of other data types. Okay. Any questions so far? Yeah. This is just trying to figure out what an array is. Hopefully, nothing super super complex yet. Okay. Bracket access. Also, something else that we've touched upon a bit this morning when we talk about how we iterate through an individual word in a list of words. So within an array, we also use these brackets to access the individual elements in an array. The brackets take in a number, which usually denotes the index. So arrays start at index 0 and they work our way up. So the max index for any array is always going to be the length of the array minus 1, right? Because if a thing is 7 things, rather than go from 1 through 7, the index goes 0 through 6 inclusive. And so that's how we access. So we use the bracket notation to access the elements in the array. Hopefully, all still review for most of us here. And then lastly is this idea that whereas with a string, if you notice, we couldn't change a string, right? If I say, hey, for the 5th letter of the string, can you make it into an uppercase or make it into another letter? Strings basically say, yeah, no, can't do that, right? With an array, it is mutable. We can change it, right? We can say, hey, right now I have a list of 5 things. I want to take my 3rd thing and swap it out for something else. I don't need to recreate my list. I can just change I can just change the actual list as is. And the way to do that is, whereas before in the last slide we were using the bracket notation to read elements, if we just say, hey, the element and use an equal operator, that will set it equal to a new value, right? This new value on the right hand of the equal sign will displace the previous value in the array. If you do this in the string, I don't think it'll actually throw an error at you. It just won't work. And you may have noticed this last night too when we were doing the problem. I think it was just silently say, oh, that's really cute, thanks, and then just avoid or just move on to the next line of code. With an array, this will actually work as a way to change the underlying array. Cool. All right. So that was pretty much it for the basics of arrays, right? Nothing groundbreaking. And really, the point of most of these workshops is to get you in a state where you can start using arrays for apply, I guess, more of the niftiness of arrays. From here on out, we have a few slides, maybe about a dozen or so, that go through various methods that kind of come built in with arrays. Built in as in things like index of that we used this morning, right, to just see if there's a particular letter match. And the reason why I'll kind of talk about them, but don't necessarily get too hung up on reading them on the slides right now, is because you'll use most of these methods in the workshops, and so you can always refer back to the slides when you're doing the workshops, and a lot of these texts will probably make a lot more sense once you actually are faced with using it, as opposed to just kind of hearing me talk about them. Okay, so the first one, dot length, super simple. We use it all the time. Just tells you how many elements are in the array. It will always give you back a number. The next one is push. This is a way to add something to the end of an array. If I call if I have an array, it's called names. I do names dot push names dot push James. That will add James into my names array. Please, 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 when you use these functions later in the workshops, also just Google them. Like look up what the MDN documentation for these are, because a lot of them are very cool, and a lot of them have a lot of functionality really that we probably won't cover in this course. And a lot of those functions are optional, right? So it's like if I want to, do several things, like the function is built to have a lot of different ways to be used. And for our class, we might only use a few of them. The second reason for why I also want I also want you to, and this is a typo here. This should be new length, like all one word. That's bad JavaScript. The other thing I wanted to talk about is also figure out for each of these functions. In JavaScript, you notice that functions kind of have two, I guess we'll say traits. One is what they do, and two is what they return. So dot push is an excellent example in my mind of something that it does something, and I think most people are just very aware that, oh, this adds something to the end of the array, but it also returns something, and what it returns in this case is the new length of the array, right? If I have a list of 3 things and I add one thing, if I do dot push, it's going to say, okay, I added this thing to the array. By the way, here's your new length, right? Obviously, when a function returns something to us, we have an option of saying, yeah, let me store that somewhere so I can use it later on, or say, oh, it's okay, I don't really care. I just care about what you do. I don't care about what you return. And so in most cases, you actually might not see the push function. You might not see us do this, which is capturing the return of the push function, but just know that these functions do, like there is a clear distinction for every function between what it does and what it returns. So in this case, when we do this now, the names array has been changed because we added James to the very end of it. And when we capture the whatever names.push James returns, it'll actually be a number. It'll be the length of the new array. So in that case, we have 4. Good? Cool. All right. Dot pop then is the opposite of dot push in that it will just remove the last element in a particular array. That's what it does. What it returns is going to be the element that it just removed. So a very common practice that you'll see when people use dot pop is they'll say, like, hey, I just I'm going to remove this thing in the array, and they might also print it out to say like, hey, this element just got removed from the array. Because obviously, once you remove an element from the array, you kind of lose access to it, right? So dot pop is just almost like has a safety in place in terms of it's going to say, by the way, this is the thing you just removed. If you want to store it somewhere else, feel free to. But what I did was I removed the last element. Giving back to you is the element that was just removed. Cool. Dot shift. Very similar to dot push, except rather than adding it to the end of the array, this adds it to the beginning of the array. And it's called shift because it shifts everything else in the array over by 1. It increments the index by 1. And as you would guess it, there is something called unshift, which takes away from the first element of the array as well. And once again, it shifts everything, but now in the opposite direction to the left. And unshift also gives back the length of the, or rather, unshift. Oh, sorry, not unshift. Shift adds it to the beginning. Wait, I'm so confused right now. What this is. Sorry, shift removes the first element in the array. Unshift adds it to the. My bad. That was a total brain fart on my side. Shift removes the first element in the array. Unshift adds it to the beginning of the array. So shift shifts everything to the left one. Unshift shifts everything to the right one in terms of the index. Yeah. Cool. Unshift is the opposite of shift. Index of, we talked about already a bit this morning. Index of, basically you pass it in something and it will look to see if that element exists in this array. If it does, it will give you the index of the element in which there's an exact match. If there's not, then it will give you back -1, right? Because -1 is an index that naturally does not exist. So when you see a -1, it just means, hey, I couldn't find that particular element in this array, and therefore there is no match. Slice. Slice is an array method. Slice is one that it basically you pass it in potentially several arguments. The one that we'll use is here is so what it does is it takes the first argument is going to be where it starts, and the second argument is going to be where it stops. And what it's actually going to do is it's actually going to, so the first argument is inclusive, so it'll start index 1, and it will go to index 2, but it won't include index 2. So that's why when we do a names.slice one-term precedence here, this only gives us back John, right? It starts at index 1, goes to index 2, but doesn't include index 2. So therefore, it's only John. And the other thing to note is that slice gives you back a new array. It doesn't change the original array. This is another wrinkle that as you use these functions, please look at documentations for them, because the documentation makes it very clear, right? You know, what it returns, what it does, and also is it modifying the original array or not. In this case, .slice does not modify the original array. .slice actually gives you back a brand new array, or a brand new copy of that array. Yep, and then if you want to create a brand new copy, an entire copy of that array, rather than making you do 0 all the way to the very end, or trying to specify it, if you pass a no argument, it will assume that means you just want a brand new copy of the array, and it will give you that too. Cool. All right. Dot includes is a little bit like index of. Oh, actually, probably could have used this instead this morning with the looking for vowels here. It just gives you back a boolean, right? Does this thing exist in this array? Index of tells us exactly where the match is if it exists. This probably goes a step lower and just says, yeah, I'll just tell you if it exists or not. If you want to look for it, use something else. I'm just telling you if it's there or not. Dot reverse, as you can imagine, reverses the array. And this is also, this is a function that does modify the original array, right? So if I call if I call this on an array, I better not want to use that array again later on in the code base, because that array has been permanently changed. Cool. So that was it, right? I know a lot of those might have seemed a bit fast, but I really do believe that once you start using, me talking off for another 20 minutes won't help you memorize them any better, but once you start using them, you'll get a really quick sense for the difference between what it does, what it returns, and how it modifies the original array. Any questions on arrays? We're doing another section on arrays tomorrow, because arrays are really powerful and there's a lot we can do with them. But based on the things I've covered so far, which is what is an array, how do we test whether or not something is an array, how do we access things in the array, and very basic principles that it has, or very basic methods that it has. Are there any questions on any of those topics? Dan?
Could you just post the slides to Slack? It's not on the actual.
Oh, it's not?
That is the video, which is very similar.
Okay, so
It's easier to access.
for everyone, if you go on your LearnOut platform, just make sure it's correctly. So if you click on the boot or the icon, the picture for this particular section, so go into the lecture. Click on the boot on the upper left-hand corner, right beneath the full-size icon. If you click on that, yep, you'll see a screen pop up, and there will be a tab called Materials. All the slides that I'm going to talk about and have talked about are all there. I guess we now only do PDFs. But yeah, so now we have PDFs of all the materials there. So you can always follow along as I'm talking on your computer if you can't see the board. If there's any material, basically, this class is designed so that anything I do in class, you should be able to mirror or mimic yourself after this class is over. That's why we record the lectures and everything. So if there's anything that we do in this class that you want a copy of, just let me know. We probably have it somewhere.